Movies.
Movies.
We've watched a few movies this summer.
We have.
And we wanted to kind of recap them and talk about them. I know in terms of YouTube, we're way behind the game, but so what? First one I want to bring up, It 2.
Okay.
What was your opinion of It 1 and your opinion of It 2?
First, it was It Chapter 2.
I will say that.
Technically the right name.
You know, my feeling about adaptations is this, is that you are never going to get the book that you love. You're never going to get it on the screen. Like, I'll be the first to say that, I actually didn't mind the the Dark Tower. I mean, the Dark Tower wasn't nearly as great as the whole series, but you're not going to be able to capture everything you love about a book on the big screen. So, as far as It, Chapter 1, Chapter 2, I thoroughly enjoyed them both. I feel like they capture the spirit of the novel. I mean, there's lots of things to quibble with. In It, Chapter 1, probably the only thing that I was disappointed in was, Mike's role as the group historian got kind of shoveled over to Ben. You know what I mean? And then that was a little bit of, it's kind of like, he was had played a real pivotal role, and we had Ben be the historian. But for the most part, I thought it was great. Like I said, I thought it captured the spirit really well. I'll be honest and say with It Chapter 2, I personally probably enjoyed It Chapter 2 more. I actually liked Finn Wolfhard played Richie Tozier, and I actually thought that his portrayal he chewed the scenery up a little bit. Like, I actually thought it was a little too much. But the guy who played Richie Tozier as an adult was perfect. He was
who did it end up being?
Pitch perfect. Who is it?
It's
Bill Hader.
Bill Hader.
Bill Hader.
Yeah.
Bill Hader.
Yeah.
Bill Hader was perfect as an adult Richie.
Well, did you see that he had suggested that?
Yeah.
I believe that was true. I believe that was part of it. Like, the kid had jokingly had said at one point, like, for the second one they got to get Bill Hader to play me.
Yeah.
And then they legitimately looked into it and ended up getting Bill Hader to play
He was great. At times, Finn Wolfhard kind of went a little too hard for my taste in It Chapter 1, but I thought Bill Hader was great in Chapter 2.
He does that in interviews.
Yeah.
I've seen him just in interviews for Stranger Things, and I think to myself, I wish that kid would just be quiet a little bit more and let the other kids talk a little bit, because he steals the
and
steals the
that's kind of Richie, he's
Yeah.
the same. But I agree. I think the casting was phenomenal, both for the kids and the adults. I enjoyed It too. I had fun. I know that there's been some complaints about it. I think a lot of people were disappointed. They said it wasn't scary. For me, I'm actually not surprised that it wasn't scary because, to be honest, the adult scenes don't scare me as much.
No.
I think what goes on is, most people when they think of It, either the book or the old series, most people think of the scenes with the kids versus, Pennywise.
Yep.
And I think it gets into that. It's always thought of as a coming-of-age story, which involves the kids. I think the adults finish out the chapter, so I think what's going on is that you've already shown the stronger aspect of the story in the first movie, so you're getting the weaker aspect of it. Not bad, just not the same thing. Right. I believe that you're also... The fact that it's fear with adults is different than fear with kids. And another complaint I've seen is that it feels... like you're covering a lot of ground, which is because the book is so big.
It's a huge book.
But the idea of them going off and doing their little individual adventures feels very disjointed from a flow perspective, but it is what's in the book. That is what is in the book. I know there's been some complaints about the ending, which has changed a little bit, but generally speaking, the ending is pretty much the same thing, minus big turtles.
Right.
So... for me, it's something where people were complaining about things, and the things they're complaining about, what surprised me about it is that it's stuff that's still in the book. The movie actually captured what's in the book, and people weren't happy. I don't know that people were expecting that. The only criticism I've seen that I think has validity that's outside the book, and I think there's validity too. I think I'm just surprised that people weren't expecting this. Weren't expecting it to be the same type of story with the adults. I don't know why they weren't expecting it to have this disjointed feel to it, since that's the book.
Right.
One complaint is that there's too much reliance on CGI, and that I agree. But again, that's a taste thing. But for me, I had fun, and I wasn't expecting to be scared as much, so I don't know what people were expecting.
Right.
I think they screwed the pooch not getting Amy Adams to play the girl. Because if you looked, I remember when watching the first one, and I haven't admittedly seen the second one yet, I remember thinking there's only one person that can play her in adulthood, and it's Amy Adams.
Huh.
She would have been a good
She
pick.
would have, like,
She
I
would have
mean,
been a
her
good
and that
pick.
little girl could have been, like, older sister, younger sister, mother, daughter, whatever you want to say. And who they ended up getting Richie Cunningham's daughter, who played it?
What's her name? Christina Hendricks or something
Yeah.
like that.
No, it wasn't
I'm
Christina
terrible with
Hendricks.
names. I'm terrible with names.
She's the big-breasted woman from, what do you call it?
She was in Mad Men.
Mad
She was
Men.
Mad Men.
That's
Yeah.
not her, though. It's, yeah, it's Richie Cunningham's. It's, Ron Howard's daughter, isn't it? Wasn't it? It Chapter 2 cast. Sometimes you got to do that.
Yep.
See, if we were Joe Rogan right now, we'd have young Amy. Oh no, it's Jessica Chastain.
Jessica-
I always
yes,
mix
yes,
up
yes,
two
that's
up.
her name.
I always
Yep.
mix up Jessica Chastain with Richie Cunningham's
daughter.
from Jurassic World. What's her name?
I
Yes,
can
yes.
say that probably the only thing that I did feel was a little weak, but again, you're talking about an over 1,000. When
Huge book. Huge
yeah,
book.
huge book to adapt. The only part where I felt like the word I'm going to use here, where I felt the plot got a little squishy, is when Mike drugs Bill with that Indian. He has this Indian vision.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that was a little bit. I was like, all right, that was
Tropey and everything.
well, it was just kind of was condensed. And again, they couldn't take in the book where they have the vision quest in the underground fort and they do the smoke and things like that. They just that would have been hard to adapt to the film. So it was a little squishy at that point. But like I said, you take a big book and you adapt it. And I know some people were concerned that, you know, that it was a little problematic that, you know, you have a Native American vision. And I agree. But still, it's such a big book. You know,
I
how are
think
you
people
gonna-
need to get over it.
how
I think
you-
people need to get over being offended by
how you gonna adapt
expressions
that?
of art. And how do you change, like you get a story that was written in the 80s,
Mm-hmm.
so are you going to change everything so that it doesn't offend
Right.
people? Like I just
Well,
feel
you can't
like,
really complain
well,
about it.
in
I
the
think
original-
people will wise up to it. I think you want to at least look into it and be like,
In
how
the
can we
re-
do this in a good way?
In
kind
the
of thing.
original book, though, I don't believe it had an Indian
No,
tribe
it's-
mentioned.
and so that's why I
though.
say
that's why it's considered problematic. Is because in the original book, what they do is they reference having a vision quest, and they set the fire, and they have a vision quest. But and again, I'm the type of guy where I'm very comfortable viewing both sides. I'm just gonna blatantly not pick a side, but
Yeah.
I'm great talking about both sides. The issues I've seen was that in the book there's no mention of a specific Indian tribe, whereas in the movie they co-opted an Indian tribe, and the only reason they use it is to provide that vision.
And I think
So-
I think the idea with the trope is that it's very much a caricature.
well, it's the magical Indian.
Yes,
it's the magical Indian.
and so it's just an
trope.
easy thing, and it
yeah.
makes a very two-dimensional thing. And I think that's what bugs people is that
Yeah.
it turns history into a two-dimensional thing.
Yeah.
And I would agree. I think people can sometimes jump on it too much, but it's also coming from a fantasy world, fantasy writing. You want to avoid tropes if you can because it's shallow.
But that was the only, like, I will tell you this. So in part one, I'm going to offer and I know I have friends out there who are going to roast me for saying this. I did not like the 90s miniseries at all. I guess maybe at the time it was good, but I remember watching them. I remember coming across the 90s miniseries a couple years later, and I'm sitting there thinking, God, this is awful.
it was
See,
awful.
Special
And John Boy was awful.
But
John
there's
Boy's never been
one-
good in anything other than the Waltons.
There's one great thing. John Boy? Really? You're going to dig on John Boy? Okay, anyway. So there's one great thing, though, about the miniseries is that Tim Curry's portrayal of Pennywise is wonderful. And it's wonderful because there are moments where Tim Curry is utterly normal and likable. Hi, I'm Pennywise the Clown. You know, he's just normal. And in the back of your mind, you're thinking, this is not normal. In part one, Skarsgård does a great job being terrifying.
Yep.
But but there is a scene in part two, under the bleachers.
The bleachers are so.
You were sitting next to me, and I don't know if you heard me. I'm
I
I'm
heard
sitting there
you.
going,
I heard
"Oh
you."
my God, this is brilliant." Where Skarsgård just dials that up, and he's such a pitiful, such a lonely character, and the girl is feeling sorry for him, and you're thinking in the back of my head, "Oh my God, kid, you're gonna die." But in part one, he kind of chewed up the scenery a little bit as it, and in part two, in that one scene, I'm like, this may be the best scene in the whole movie. Because even you,
I love
you're
that
thinking,
scene.
I feel a little bad for Pennywise. Pennywise, it was really, really
but
good.
here's the thing. But
was
again,
really
it goes
crafty.
back to that's a scene where he's engaging with a child. And
Yes.
again, my point is the best part of that story, the book and everything, is the scenes where it engages with the children. And that is his main target,
and
is children.
I think in the first one of the things that I thought they got a little wrong, and that I think they did better in the first one, was that first pivotal scene with him in the sewer. I felt like Curry played it better, because it's like you said, at first he was more welcoming and engaging, and you could see how, what was the little boy's name? Georgie. And he was, you could see how, okay, that kid could get sucked into going down there and talking to Curry's character.
Curry's like, hi, I'm Pennywise. Now we're no longer strangers.
Skarsgård was a little sloppy. Like right off the bat in that very first scene, he looked scarier than he was supposed to look, because it's like, what little kid was going to go down to the grate and talk to that scumbag?
Right.
Whereas Curry kind of played it more
really affable.
At first, and then it kind of slowly went evil. Whereas but Skarsgård, I like Skarsgård and everything. He was great in Castle Rock. Did you guys see Castle Rock too?
I did see Castle Rock. This is not one of our main topics tonight, but I was actually moderate. Okay, so I was impressed by Castle Rock. I appreciated Castle Rock. I'm not sure I actually enjoyed it.
Do you think it was an Easter egg for the sake of being an Easter egg?
No,
more than anything?
it was a little too. I don't know how else to say it. Like one of our podcasts here, I'm going to talk about the movie Mother, with Jennifer Lawrence and Javier Bardem, and my feelings about Castle Rock are similar to Mother. Whereas you look at that and be like, wow, that's a great piece of art. But then, did you really actually have fun watching it?
Well, I think the ending got a little weak. I think it lost me towards the last couple of episodes.
Yes, I agree too.
Where it had me enraptured to start, and how they tied things in, and you're like, you're starting to see how things are connecting.
Right.
And then you have that moment of, what in the hell is going on? Like, where is this going? And then at the end, you were just like, that's how they did that. You felt like they did you dirty. By the end. Can you grab one of those tasty beers out of there?
Yeah, grab. That's pumpkin.
I'm gonna break into another one.
So Chuck, final thoughts on it.
What are your final thoughts? I'm grabbing beer.
Yeah, you do the final thoughts while he's grabbing beer.
I think it was a perfectly good adaptation. It's not without its flaws, but I guess maybe this is a good barometer for what you can expect with this series. I'm the type of person that can look at I'm a Stephen King fan, so obviously I can look at flaws, and I can be totally okay with flaws and be like, hey, it was an enjoyable experience. I enjoyed it. I liked it. And I have no problem. I don't think admitting a work has flaws is, somehow being disloyal. I think you can say, I like that. It wasn't perfect, but I like that.
I think it was, considering the source material as big as it is, and as in some parts get convoluted with like the turtle and stuff like that you can't bring into there without going, you'd have to do a trilogy to honestly get into that realm.
Now the funny thing about that is they've proposed a trilogy. I don't know if it's a good idea.
I don't think it's a good idea, but it's, given the source material, I think it's about as good of a job as you can do with adapting it. I thought it was great. I think it was well casted. I think Bill Skarsgård did a great job. It had some definite scary moments, unlike the series. I like you. I saw the series not when it first came out. I saw it years later,
like,
and it didn't age well. It's rough. But it was enjoyable. So even when it wasn't scary, I was still enjoying it as a story.
I watched it more recently. I went on vacation with my sister. So all the females that went on vacation, it was a bunch of families that went, they all wanted to go hang out and party and get boozed up. So they left all the kids with me and somebody else, and I decide, hey, let's watch it. So it's like a bunch of teenage kids,
and then
some kids that were definitely a little bit too young to be watching it. And I've got only two of them are my kids, and I've got a baby who's sleeping, and then my little daughter who, both my kids may have been sleeping, but I'm scaring the crap out of everybody else's kids. And the whole time I'm watching it, I'm thinking, wow, like, I loved this movie at one point when I was younger. Like, it wasn't scary. Well. I mean, I almost don't think you can call it scary. It's it was kind of like a monster movie that wouldn't, now it's like a monster movie that wouldn't scare you the same way if you watch the Swamp Monster.
The old black and white scared people back then, but you watch them now, it's
and
fun.
It's really hard to adapt Stephen King books into to becoming quality movies. When you're reading them, he's good at like getting at your core and like affecting you biologically as you read his stories, and that's why you're willing to suffer through them to the end, where his endings are often a little bit campy.
Which I love that they actually poked at that. They poked at that idea. The criticism
Stephen King's cameo is the best cameo of all. Did you read my book? Nah, I didn't like the ending. Yeah. Which is like the slam against all Stephen King books.
But as a Stephen King is who made me love reading.
Right.
So, like, I didn't want to read anything when I was a kid. I remember reading the Lord of the Flies, and I remember thinking, okay, that was cool, and that's about the only thing that I ever actually read in school. So it's like, I'm a 21-year-old kid who reads one of my friend's moms. Do you remember Doug Lawrence?
I do remember Doug,
He's a principal now, and his mom is the one who got me reading Stephen King, like conned me into reading Stephen King books. So I forget the first one I read, but I think it was The Shining, and I was hooked. And then I thought we talked about this too, I thought Stephen King was a horror writer for a while, like, because the first books I read were The Shining, Pet Cemetery, Shining, Pet Cemetery, and then It.
Yep. Salem's Lot,
and I read all the, and then you had all the weird
Christine.
Short story books and all that crap, and I used to think he was
he's transcended that now, though. He writes in his own Stephen King
genre.
And
by the time I started reading him, he had transcended that already for years. I just didn't know that he had.
And I think part of the difficulty with adapting Stephen King and writers like him is that he's a character-driven storyteller versus a plot-driven one, and plot will always be easier to adapt to, I think, the screen than character-driven stories, because you can't dig into their heads the way you can.
And you end up not identifying with the character. Like in the books, you love his characters. He writes great characters, and in the end, I just can't get behind the movies.
His short stories and his novellas make better movies.
Yep,
like when you think of like Shawshank Redemption, Stand By Me, 1408. These are the ones that make the better movies. Which beer me, by the way.
The Green Mile.
Interesting.
Incredible, though. The Green Mile he wrote is a serial novel, right?
Green
Did he put it out that way in a serial form?
Yes,
where he put it out
in serial form. Yep. One final comment before we move on to our next movie. Probably only Stephen King nerds know this, but in the Stephen King universe, he implies that the losers were still not successful in destroying it. I don't know if you ever read The Dreamcatcher.
Yep.
But
no,
in Dream...
The Dreamcatcher was one of the worst movie adaptations of any movie.
By Doug Wahlberg from the New Kids in the Block.
Donnie Wahlberg.
Donnie Wahlberg, yeah.
Donuts!
But, so in the book, there's an interesting link in it. Pennywise is referred at one point to the name Bob Gray.
Yes.
And in Dreamcatcher, they refer to the alien as Mr. Gray. Mm-hmm. And then in the book, they go through Derry briefly, and the Losers Club have erected a statue in memory of Eddie and Stan, but someone has scrawled graffiti all over it that reads "It lives."
Well, and
so I've always thought that was interesting that you never see another book about Pennywise, but Stephen King. But when you talk about Stephen King and the multiverse and that he created and things like that, but he implied that it still wasn't dead.
But isn't that the backstory for Pennywise too? That Pennywise was some sort of
alien
being, or like some almost godly being that was
in the book
passed down to this planet somehow, or ended up
here. In the book, when they have their vision quest in the they do the smokehouse thing in their underground fort, they have this vision of a meteorite that crashes into Earth thousands of millions of years ago, and that was it.
And that's probably one of the closest points that Stephen King ever comes to Lovecraft as an influence. He gets very somewhat Lovecraftian in
Stephen King's. Stephen King's very Lovecraftian.
Yeah.
I've always said my favorite Lovecraftian writer is not even Lovecraft, it's Stephen King.
Well,
when you read a lot of his short stories and novellas, extremely Lovecraftian.
But he's also very Lovecraftian in the sense that he can't finish a story.
No, I think if you read some of his short stories, and then we'll move on to our next movie. There's a great short story he wrote, or maybe like a novelette called Crouch's End, which it basically takes place in London. It's about these folks that get lost in this fog, and it's very contemporary. It's very easy to read because if you've read Lovecraft, some of his stuff, I mean, Lovecraft like his adverbs and adjectives, but it was, I think Stephen King's done the best, at least in his time period, in taking Lovecraft and making it, like, in Lovecraft's fiction, it was always a professor or a scholar, or, I've inherited my uncle's estate, where King would take that same Lovecraftian vibe, but it would be like some regular guy, and that was, anyway.